Hey, what's up? It's cute what if? This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku was reborn as the Dark Wolf Apex. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. Apex Shirakumo, born Izuku Midoriya, carried more than a new name. He kept the memories and the scars of a life that had started quietly in the Midoriya household and then unraveled. As a normal boy, he was slight, with green eyes and dark green hair, and even before everything changed there were hints of something different: claws and fur along his arms and legs that he could not explain. By 15 he had multiple forms. A human frame, a larger hybrid form that rose with every surge of power, and a full berserk werewolf form that towered over others. Those forms shifted his height and silhouette, but what defined him was the strange and dangerous quirk sleeping inside him. His birth quirk, known later as consumption, allowed him to gain permanent copies of other quirks by taking and integrating biological samples. As that quirk evolved, it became known as Devourer, a deep, primal ability to absorb, store, use, and transfer quirks through contact with another being's genetic material. He could also pass stored quirks to someone else by pressing his palm to theirs. A visible red energy would flow and allow the transfer. Apex never flaunted that ability. It was a private, uncanny thing that made him both valuable and terrifying. He had been born into a household with a warm, if complicated, set of relationships. His father, Hisashi Midoriya, possessed a fire-breathing quirk and was alive but distant. His mother, Inko Midoriya, had a gentle way of drawing small things close to her and was the center of his love and comfort until her death. He had a younger sister, Izumi Midoriya, who showed powers of intense internal heat and a dangerous brightness. Itsuka Kendo had been his friend through many of the darker days. School did not go easily for him. Teachers lowered his grades and students and staff found ways to make him small. He was beaten down by bullying and indifference, treated as something other than human. The heroes and the police looked away far too often. Still, Itsuka and his mother remained steadfast. They provided warmth and a fragile sense of belonging that kept him moving forward. For a while he and his mother moved into a small apartment, trying to start over. When he was 12, the fragile safety collapsed. His mother was killed in a villain attack. The loss hollowed out the small respite he had. Itsuka moved away. Abandoned by almost everyone around him and without the people who gave him grounding, he gave in to despair. After a night no one would later admit to remembering, he was found and reported dead. The public story was simple: a tragic end, a quiet burial. The public story was a lie. Unknown to the world, his body was taken and altered by those who worked for All for One and Dr. Kyudai Garaki. He was remade into a high-end Nomu called Omega, a being engineered for combat, with an enhanced body, reinforced frame, animalistic senses, and instincts tuned for a predator. He was placed under strict control and forced into fights against pro-heroes and other targets. The Nomu upgrades granted him a dozen potent abilities. His physiology adopted wolf-like traits: furred limbs, sharpened jaws, fangs, and powerful claws. Muscle augmentation and enhanced durability made his strikes heavy and his body hard to break. Super regeneration and accelerated healing let him recover quickly from injuries. He could shift between bipedal and quadrupedal movement for bursts of speed, cling to walls, and use heightened smell and hearing to track opponents. In battle he could form bone-based blades and spikes from his arms in ways that looked fantastical rather than gory, and his voice could erupt into a focused howl that disoriented enemies. Pain was dulled. Adrenaline surged under stress so that he fought on when others would falter. A reinforced steel framework in his skeleton gave his blows extra weight. Because of the original consumption quirk, each confrontation became a chance to change. In the Noma body, Apex absorbed samples of an opponent's genetic material during fights, and with that process he learned and took on quirks he encountered. Over time his store of abilities grew: electrical pulses that chain between targets, stone-like defenses, wind-enhancing trails that increased speed, the ability to replay short memory echoes from surfaces he had touched, and even hands that could heat intensely and reshape what they gripped. He sometimes sprouted iron-like vines from his skin that acted as both armor and weapon. each borrowed ability layered onto the others, making him unpredictable and dangerous. He obeyed orders because something in his constructed brain sought survival and because his handlers demanded it. But there was a current in him that resisted control. The act of absorbing other quirks did more than add power. Some of those powers carried memories. One of those transfers began to loosen the hold his captors had on him. Fragments of former life, the curve of Itsuka's smile, the cadence of his mother's voice re-emerged like echoes in a room long after the music stopped. Those recollections were small at first, then insistent. At the USJ incident, the floodgates opened. Seeing Itsuka again and the faces of people who had tormented him brought everything jostling back into place. The hidden sorrow and fury he had carried found lines of expression through the mix of quirk and animal instinct. He remembered who he had been and who he had lost. The name Apex Shirakumo, given when he was remade, and the name Izuku Midoriya he had been born with braided together in his mind. He was both a creation and a survivor. That awakening did not resolve everything. He still stood under the eye of all for one in Garaki, and the world still saw a weapon where a boy had once lived. But the regained memories changed his path. They produced hesitation where there had been only obedience. They sparked a refusal to be only a tool. He began to act with intention rather than following commands, and the quirks he carried became choices rather than chains. Apex liked and remembered much of his past: admiration for Yue, respect for All Might, loyalty to Itsuka Kendo, and the warmth his mother once provided. He held resentments as well against Izumi Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo for different reasons, against those who had enforced quirk discrimination, and against the architects of his new form. He mistrusted All for One and the engineers who created him, and he wanted no part of fake heroes who exploited others. The transformation left him a complex figure, a hybrid with memories. Stitched from two selves, powers taken from many hands, and a heart that still learned what it meant to care. He moved through a world that once had failed him, now armed with abilities that could both protect and devastate. The balance between predator and protector defined every choice he made from that moment on, and the returned memories of Itsuka and his mother guided him away from the silence he had once chosen. All Might stood tall, steam rising from his body, unconcerned because his students were safe and the monstrous Nomu had been neutralized. He turned to face the remaining villains and boomed that they had failed to kill him and that he still stood, demanding to know what they would do next. Tamura scratched his neck, irritated and bewildered at All Might's strength. He realized the hero's time limit had likely expired and decided that if they struck now, they might finally finish him. Tamura ordered Kurogiri to bring in Omega. Kurogiri hesitated and protested that Omega was still in testing, had only ever fought one-on-one, and could not handle the entire UA force. He felt an unusual protectiveness toward Omega, remembering the Nomu's moments of innocence and the comfort he had offered in quiet times. Tamura cut him off, insisting their leader had authorized every resource. Reluctantly, Kurogiri opened a warp gate. From the swirling mist stepped a hulking, wolf-like beast taller than All Might, massive and muscular with dark green fur and chains dangling from cuffs on his limbs. Golden yellow eyes scanned the battlefield and fixed on All Might with something like recognition. Omega turned to Tamura, awaiting orders, and Tamura commanded him to kill the hero. Omega's ears twitched, his fingers curled, his tail snapped, and he charged. All Might could no longer move, he had reached his limit. An explosion slammed into Omega just as Katsuki Bakugo and Izumi Midoriya arrived in their hero costumes. Katsuki shouted for Omega to get away from All Might and struck with an explosion. Memories surged through Omega, taunts and abuse, names like worthless and freak. He buckled under the flood of pain and rage, breaking from Tamura's command. Omega lunged at Katsuki. A bone blade burst from his arm and narrowly missed Izumi. An explosion distracted him briefly, but he recovered and struck Katsuki with a brutal blow. Claws tore at Bakugo, leaving him crying out and collapsing. Omega slammed Bakugo's head repeatedly until Bakugo lay still and unconscious. Omega turned toward Izumi with a snarl and charged. Izumi responded by launching two molten metal attacks that passed through Omega as if they had no effect. A bone blade struck Izumi's right hand, causing her to cry out and drop her attack. Omega called her by name. Izumi, astonished that he knew her name, gasped, and Omega taunted her, using the name Deku and accusing her of making his life unbearable for being quirkless. He blamed her for his suffering and vowed to make her pay. Omega triggered several augmentations boosts to his strength, speed, and other abilities and charged at Izumi with overwhelming fury. For a moment, everyone around them froze at the intensity of his assault. UA students, staff, and villains alike. Only Itsuka Kendo broke through the paralysis. She rushed forward, pleading with Omega to stop, tears in her eyes. Her words reached him. Omega paused and gripped his head. Memories and a name came back to him, and his voice broke as he whispered Kendo's name. He howled in agony as recognition returned. Tears streamed down his face and his eyes shifted to an emerald green. Kendo smiled through her tears and took a step forward, but suddenly a gray, viscous substance began to pour from Omega's mouth and coat his body. Tamura and Kurogiri were too stunned to react before the same substance began to affect them. Kendo cried out that it couldn't be happening again. Omega looked at her, sorrow in his voice, and apologized once. The substance continued to spread until Omega vanished. Izumi Midoriya was gone. All for one erupted with fury back at his base, demanding how his control had been broken. Kurogiri, unusually unsettled, tried to caution his master against losing composure. The doctor's voice crackled through a speaker, urging them to reapply the mind control quirk immediately to prevent further chaos. All for one forced himself to calm down and agreed that they could not risk Omega remembering everything. He ordered Kurogiri to warp them to the containment chamber, admitting that his current vessel would not survive another long-range jump. Kurogiri bowed and complied. A purple portal opened and they stepped through into a shattered underground room strewn with rubble and glowing chains. At the center of the room, bound and kneeling, was Omega. Quirk-canceling chains pulsed with a dull blue light, anchoring him to the cracked floor as the chamber trembled with his presence. All for one approached with measured steps and addressed him by the name he had used during the fight. Omega stirred and murmured All for One's name in return. All for One allowed a dark chuckle and told him he was no longer Izuku Midoriya. All for One declared that Omega was his creation and reached forward with both hands toward Omega's head. He ordered Omega to sleep and forget again. Before he could grasp him, Omega moved faster than anyone expected. With a feral snarl, he lunged and bit All for One's wrist, drawing blood. All for One howled in pain, but it was already too late. The moment All for One tasted the blood, something ancient and monstrous within Omega awakened. Power surged through him as he absorbed and claimed dozens of quirks. His original ability, consumption, began to evolve into something far more terrible. Omega's body expanded into a more imposing, stylized form. His frame grew larger, dark protrusions and armored ridges appeared along his arms and back, and his claws sharpened into lethal implements. He stood taller, moving with terrifying speed and strength. Omega roared with a guttural, wrath-filled voice aimed at All for One, then unleashed a devastating punch that sent All for One flying through several walls in a blur of crushed steel and shattered concrete. Omega turned, eyes blazing, and approached Kurogiri. He placed a single clawed hand against Kurogiri's chest. For a heartbeat, the glow of quirks tied to mind control and memory suppression flared, then went out like candles snuffed by wind. Kurogiri, shaken, realized the influence on him had been broken and asked what had been done. Omega, his voice weakening, strained to say that he had freed him. Then the monstrous form trembled. The transformation destabilized, the dark protrusions and ridges withdrew and his exaggerated features began to dissolve. Omega collapsed as his body reverted, shrinking until he became a battered, half-conscious 15-year-old boy with faint wolf-like traits. Kurogiri caught him as he fell and recognized him as Izuku. Izuku managed a whispered, disjointed utterance of Kurogiri's name before Kurogiri's mist expanded around them and, with a final pulse, they vanished into the darkness. 1 week later, Izuku and Kurogiri, now fully aware of his past identity as Oboro Shirakumo, had escaped from All for One. Inside an old, long-abandoned cabin that Oboro and his father once used, Oboro paced in mist form, wrestling with uncertainty. The purple haze of his mist had softened to a light blue. He worried aloud that he could not return as Oboro Shirakumo, nor remain Kurogiri. One identity was supposed to be dead, and the other carried the stigma of villainy. He hovered over Izuku, who lay breathing steadily but unconscious, and fretted that he needed to get him help. A thought struck Oboro. All for One had mentioned Nizu, and Nizu was the smartest person he knew. Resolving to seek help, Oboro decided he would go to UA, relying on his warp gate to take him to the exact location. He placed a gentle hand on Izuku's shoulder, promising he would return, then allowed his mist to deepen to purple and vanished through a swirling warp gate, heading for UA. At UA, Nizu reviewed the aftermath of the USJ incident with the staff and called attention to the Nomus, focusing specifically on Omega. Nizu displayed a photo of the monstrous figure and noted that Omega had arrived after the main Nomu was defeated by All Might. Curiously, he observed, Kurogiri seemed reluctant to bring Omega into the fray. An audio recording of Kurogiri and Tamura before it had been paused supported this. Nizu explained that Kurogiri had stated Omega was still in testing, yet he had been deployed against two students, Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo, both of whom sustained serious injuries. Based on what Kendo had recounted and further research, Nizu believed there was a connection worth investigating. Nizu then revealed another startling connection. Izuku Midoriya, shown alongside the report, was the twin of Izumi Midoriya. He explained that Izuku had been quirkless and deeply affected by a string of personal tragedies and abuse. According to Detective Tsukachi's report and Kendo's testimony, Izuku had been close to Izumi before her family moved away, shortly after his mother, Inko Midoriya, died, which devastated him. 4 years he had endured relentless bullying and emotional abuse, and the accumulation of grief and isolation became too much. Nizu solemnly stated that at only 12 years old, Izuku had taken his own life. The room fell silent at the weight of that revelation. Nizu held out a firmer hope, however, noting that at the UFA Kendo's presence had stirred something in Izuku, a spark of recognition and resistance, and for a moment he had been himself again before being taken away. Nizu declared the priority to be locating him. If they could find him, there might be a chance to save him. He emphasized that while most Nomus acted as mindless husks, Omega had displayed clear thought, and Kendo might be the best avenue to reach him. At that moment, a voice interrupted. Kurogiri emerged from the shadows and the staff readied themselves. Kurogiri raised both hands and announced his intent to surrender, offering to share everything he knew. He insisted he had not chosen his fate, it had been forced upon him. Nizu consulted with Naomasa, who confirmed Kurogiri's sincerity, and the tension in the room shifted. Midnight asked for clarification about being forced into that life. Kurogiri explained that he had not been born as Kurogiri but had been transformed by All for One, created from a dead body, reanimated, and given quirks. All Might reacted at the mention of All for One as the staff processed the implications. One of the staff members exclaimed that he was still alive. Kurogiri sighed and confirmed that he had survived the battle. He explained that he knew All Might's quirk because he had overheard All for One ranting about it to the doctor. He added that he was what the League called a high-end Nomu, a being that retained thought and strategy, fragments of who they once were. He went on to say that Omega and he were different, fully sentient yet previously shackled by memory suppression and mind control quirks. The staff fell silent. Midnight asked who he had been. Instead of answering immediately, the mist around Kurogiri's face began to disperse, revealing a face so familiar it sent shockwaves through the room. Midnight reacted with tears, unable to believe what she saw. Present Mike reacted with disbelief, insisting that they had seen the body and that the man could not be alive. Oboro Shirakumo, the man they had thought long gone, gave a trembling smile and confirmed that it was really him. Midnight rushed forward and embraced him tightly, sobbing. Present Mike followed, choking back tears. One by one, the staff moved in to welcome their lost friend back with hugs and quiet words. Principal Nizu wiped a tear and addressed him as Shirakumo. Oboro, faint pale blue mist still swirling gently around him, thanked Principal Nizu and said he had to come because he needed to bring Izuku here before All for One found him. Nizu urged them not to waste any time. Oboro opened a portal and brought Izuku into the room. The boy was still unconscious. Oboro expressed concern that Izuku had been out cold for a whole week. Recovery Girl offered to examine him and asked Oboro if she could be warped to her office. Oboro confirmed that Warp Gate worked through coordinate-based warping and that if he knew the exact location, he could get them anywhere. As they discussed the League and All for One, a new ray of light seemed to shine. A new day had come and a new life was waiting. Itsuka Kendo had not slept since the USJ incident. The name Izuku echoed in her mind, a constant, aching presence. She could think of nothing else. Her mother called gently for her to come downstairs, and Itsuka groggily sat up, dark bags under her eyes and her orange hair untied and messy. She moved like a ghost, running on numb determination. At the bottom of the stairs she froze. Vlad King stood in the living room with his arm in a cast. Principal Nizu was there beside him, and a tall man with mist-like light blue hair and glowing golden eyes sat with them. There was something familiar about him she could not place. Itsuka stared and asked, startled, whether the visitors were Vlad-sensei and Principal Nizu, and whether the mist-haired man was a new staff member. The man smiled sheepishly and introduced himself as Oboro Shirakumo, a new teacher and transport specialist, and offered a respectful bow before sitting on the couch. When Itsuka tried to place him against Midnight, Oboro said softly that Midnight was his wife. Itsuka's eyes widened in disbelief, and she said she had been told he died in a villain attack. Oboro lowered his gaze and confirmed that he had died but that his body had been taken by the League and turned into a high-end Nomu. The room fell into stunned silence. A spark of hope flickered in Itsuka's chest, and she demanded to know whether he knew where Izuku was. Nizu explained that was exactly why they had come and invited her to sit. Itsuka took her place with her parents. Nizu said that the USJ incident had been horrific, but that from that chaos something extraordinary had happened. Something or someone had saved 2 lives. He told her directly that she, Itsuka Kendo, had brought back Izuku Midoriya and Oboro Shirakumo, and because of her they were alive and free. The revelation hit her in waves. Itsuka's voice broke as she said he was back. Nizu confirmed that Izuku was indeed back, though still unconscious and asleep for over a week. He was safe and recovering but would need help when he woke. Her parents were stunned by the news. Her father, Haruki, choked up remembering the reports of Izuku's supposed death and the choice he and his wife had made when Inko died. Oboro explained that, although he was technically a Nomu, he had kept his mind as had Izuku. They were classified as high-end, smarter, stronger, able to retain thought. Most high-end Nomu held 4 to 6 quirks, but Izuku had carried more than 15 quirks before they escaped, plus a birth quirk that no one had suspected because everyone had thought he was quirkless. Oboro walked them through what had happened, Izuku's hidden quirk, All for One taking him, the experiments and mind control, how they had escaped, and how Kurogiri had finally remembered who he once was. The family listened as tears flowed. Itsuka cried and trembled, overwhelmed that he was really back. Her mother sobbed that they had thought he was lost forever. Haruki thanked Oboro for telling them and confessed how much the boy had meant to him. After a long quiet moment, Nizu asked if they would like to see Izuku, and the answer was immediate and unanimous. They prepared to go, Itsuka taking some time to clean herself up though the dark circles under her eyes remained. Oboro opened a warp gate and they passed through to UA. A few hours earlier, in the UA medical wing, Izuku lay asleep in a medical bed surrounded by the soft beeps and rhythmic whirs of machines. 4 lines led into his arms and sensors sat on his chest and temples as advanced monitors tracked every breath and heartbeat. Recovery Girl kept a constant watch, eyes flicking between the boy and the vitals. She adjusted a few settings and murmured that he seemed stable physically. Recovery Girl thought his body was still adjusting to all those quirks. It must be part of his birth quirk, whatever it truly was. Her eyes drifted to the dormant wolf traits still visible on him, elongated canines, faint fur along his forearms and legs, and the occasional twitch of feral slits at his eyelids. He had claws and patches of fur on his arms and legs, but those features were subdued now. She frowned and noted that the active quirks were dormant while the passive ones, like reinforced bones, remained functional. Turning to a nearby device that projected quirk patterns like overlapping constellations, she watched one signature glow brighter and darker, twisted and tangled. Her expression tightened as she explained that he carried the quirk All for One, but it was not the same. It had fused with his birth quirk and appeared tailored to him. She placed a hand on the edge of the bed, worry in her eyes, and said that the boy would need more than physical healing, he would need extensive therapy, and Hound Dog would have his work cut out for him. The door clicked open and All Might entered, slightly hunched, scanning the room until his gaze softened on Izuku. He asked Recovery Girl how the boy was. Recovery Girl replied that, physically, he was remarkably stable and that his body was adapting to the quirks inside him. She expected him to wake within a few hours. All Might took slow steps forward, voice heavy as he reflected that All for One was a monster and that what had been done to a child was unforgivable. He clenched his fists and admitted it reminded him how deeply he felt he had failed. Recovery Girl looked back at him with a steady, kind gaze and reassured him that what had happened was not his fault. She said they had all misjudged All for One and should have been more prepared, but conceded that, in a twisted way, if All for One had truly died, this young man would not be here at all. Silence settled between them. All Might agreed that the boy was alive and here, and now needed the kind of help he could give. He paused and murmured that he would think about the matter later. Recovery Girl raised an eyebrow and asked if he was thinking about a particular responsibility. All Might nodded and admitted he wouldn't deny that he had been considering it. He said the boy's heart had always been pure and that once the boy was truly healed, he would ask him. If the boy refused, he would respect that, but if not, he would pass it to him. If that failed, he would consider others. He looked down with the shadow of a smile and added that he had a feeling the boy might not refuse. A few hours later, the Kendo family arrived in the medical wing. Led by Itsuka with her mother's hand in hers, they paused at the doorway and took in the sight of Izuku in the hospital bed. He lay still, fully healed but altered. The overwhelming beast-like appearance had faded into the form of a lean, scarred young man with wild green hair, subtle lupin ears, and patches of fur. His hands showed faint claws and his features were sharpened by his ordeal, but he looked peaceful. Itsuka stepped forward, moved by the sight. Recovery Girl turned with a soft smile and said she was glad they were all there. He would be waking soon, but there were matters to discuss. Before he stirred, the group settled Nizu with a cup of tea, Oboro close by with folded arms, the Kendos sharing looks of worry and hope. Recovery Girl directed her first question to Oboro, asking again if he and Imuri were certain about taking responsibility for the boy, since looking after him would not be easy. Oboro leaned back with a crooked, heartfelt smile and explained that the kid had saved his life and that he felt he owed him. He said he and Imuri had already discussed it and wanted to be there for the boy. Sakura asked for clarification about what he meant by taking care of him. Oboro stated that, for Izuku's safety, he needed guardianship from someone close. The boy's so-called father was not an option, and he could not leave UA. He and Imuri already lived on campus, so it made sense. Sakura admitted she was not surprised. Oboro grinned and said visits would be welcome, dorms were being added soon, and the boy would be surrounded by friends. Haruki exhaled and asked only to be allowed to see him, which was all he wanted. Itsuka sat quietly, eyes fixed on the sleeping face, and took his hand in hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. Recovery Girl cleared her throat and shifted the conversation back to important matters. She confirmed his physical health was excellent, his regeneration was remarkable, but warned that mentally he was scarred. She said PTSD was likely after his time as Omega and the things he had endured. He would begin therapy with Hound Dog immediately, but he would also need the support of friends and family. Nizu nodded silently, watching Izuku. Recovery Girl then addressed his quirk. She explained that his birth quirk allowed him to permanently copy quirks, but that something had changed when it fused with All for One, an ability that grants the user control over quirks by touch. In his case, the fusion had evolved. He could now give quirks without losing them, and they became integrated into his DNA. his body had been adapting and merging the quirks, sometimes combining them into new abilities to accommodate them, which explained the long recovery time. The revelation hung in the air. Itsuka reacted in awe, asking if he could both take and give quirks. Recovery Girl confirmed that was correct and added that there appeared to be no detectable limit. The ability was extraordinarily powerful and potentially dangerous, so they would need to monitor him closely. Oboro chuckled, trying to lighten the mood by remarking that the kid had effectively broken the power scale. Haruki, wide-eyed, agreed. Our little pup turned out to be an apex predator. Sakura quietly reached for her daughter's free hand. Itsuka said nothing, but her grip on Izuku's hand tightened, protective, steady, and filled with silent promise. In the soft hum of the machines, the boy in the bed stirred with a twitch of his fingers that made everyone freeze. Recovery Girl noted softly that he was waking up. Izuku's eyes opened slowly. Izuku groggily wondered what was happening. The room was blurry at first, but his nose worked before his eyes. Scents came at him in waves, the coolness of clouds and morning mist, a wild, layered tang like many animals woven into one, a sterile warmth that spoke of an older woman and comforting remedies, and then the scents that pulled at his heart: coffee and aged wood, flowers and candy, and a blend of coffee and blossoms he recognized deeply. Izuku blinked slowly and recognized Itsuka. Itsuka choked back tears and cried out his name, then lunged forward to wrap herself around him. Her embrace was desperate, as if letting go might make him vanish. Izuku did not hesitate. He returned the hug, his fur-covered arms enfolding her gently. Both of them sobbed quietly until their tears mixed. Izuku shook with emotion and apologized over and over, tearful and overwhelmed. Itsuka held him tighter and reassured him that him being back was what mattered. Neither of them noticed how his build had changed. He was taller and broader now, but to her he remained the same Izuku. Across the room, Haruki and Sakura watched with tears on their cheeks and soft smiles breaking through. Together they stepped forward and embraced their daughter and the young man they already considered family. When the tears ebbed, Izuku looked around, eyes scanning the white room that now felt full of warmth and care. He asked where he was. Oboro smiled small and explained that they were in the UA medical wing and teased that the nickname Little Wolf fit him. Izuku narrowed his eyes and said that only one person had ever called him that, and then realized why a familiar scent had seemed known to him. Oboro's form shimmered into a mist that briefly resembled Kurogiri before returning to Oboro, and Izuku noted the resemblance. Oboro laughed quietly at Izuku's observation. Izuku, tail flicking, observed that his nose was more wolf-like now and that he could smell people's histories. Haruki frowned and asked what Izuku meant by other quirks. Recovery Girl stepped forward with a gentle, serious explanation. Izuku's quirk had merged with aspects of All for One. The man himself was still alive, but parts of his collection of powers had remained with Izuku. Recovery Girl asked Izuku if he knew how many quirks he had. Izuku thought for a moment and estimated that he had over 1,000 quirks, though most had fused into hybrids and he could not tell them apart anymore. Itsuka squeezed his hand and promised they would figure it out together, calling him affectionately by a nickname. Izuku blushed, ears twitching, grateful and embarrassed, and realized he cared for her, something he had been blind to before. Recovery Girl then asked Sakura and Haruki to speak with her outside. Nizu and Oboro would stay with Izuku, and young Kendo would remain nearby as well. In the hallway, the nurse's tone shifted from nurturing to the steady professionalism of a seasoned hero. Recovery Girl told them she needed to speak about Izumi Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo. She explained that Nizu had been investigating, and what they had uncovered was disturbing. Those two had a long history of bullying and severe abuse toward other students, with Izuku as their primary target. Sakura's breath caught and Haruki's hands clenched at the news. Recovery Girl explained that their school records had been deceptively clean. There had been no reason to suspect what they were hiding until incidents at the training grounds and USJ revealed a pattern. She said that Izuku's academic record had been erased, as if he had been removed from official existence, and that a hidden suicide note had surfaced which exposed what had happened. The people who had covered everything up had done so to protect Bakugo and Izumi. She went on to say there was even more still to uncover, but for now the best they could do was suspend those students until the true records arrived. If the Hero Commission or villains obtained those records or the students themselves, the consequences could be dire. They had no choice but to keep them at UA for everyone's safety. Recovery Girl put a gentle hand on Sakura's arm and told them she wanted them to know before the outside world did. They were going to protect Izuku, but a storm was coming and they had to be ready. Back in the medical room, Nizu informed Izuku that for his safety he would be staying at UA under the care of Oboro Shirakumo and Nimuri Shirakumo. To make it official, both had agreed to adopt him. Izuku smiled softly and agreed, as long as he could still spend time with Itsuka and with his aunt and uncle. Nizu reassured him that he would always have time with them, and that once internships began the dorm system would be operational so everyone could stay together. Izuku and Itsuka exchanged a glance, still holding hands tightly, both silently grateful for the small measure of peace. Oboro said that soon there would be a joint meeting between classes 1A and 1B. From then on they would be one unit called Class 1 Alpha. 2 new students were being added, Izuku and 1 more from 1C. Oboro speculated the new student might be related to Aizawa. Nizu laughed and said he had already run DNA tests and confirmed the new student was not Aizawa's child. Oboro wondered aloud when Nizu had found time to do that, and Nizu broke into a burst of manic laughter. Izuku awkwardly acknowledged the exchange and tried to move the conversation along. Oboro announced that for the next few weeks everyone would go through daily evaluations and training. He then indicated there was more to discuss, and the group prepared to continue. The matter concerned them. Izuku's hands clenched and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Itsuka urged him to breathe and to let the other person finish. The wolf boy took a shaky breath, then another, and slowly the tension melted away. Oboro reached out to pat his head. The calming touch made Izuku blink before he leaned into it instinctively. Oboro grinned and teased that the little wolf did like head pats. Izuku, resigned, acknowledged that he was no longer surprised. Nizu spoke softly and returned the group to the business at hand, explaining that investigations into Bakugo and Izumi had uncovered Ming evidence but not enough to expel them outright. Until their full records could be recovered, they would be suspended and officially described as recovering from what had happened at the USJ. Izuku lowered his gaze, his ears folding back slightly in a mix of guilt and anger. Itsuka told him he did not have to feel bad about what he had said to those who had hurt him, reminding him that she had tended his wounds more times than she cared to count and had seen the harm they'd done. Izuku admitted that he still hated them and that a part of him wanted to retaliate, but he argued that if he stooped to their level he could not claim moral superiority. He squeezed Itsuka's hand tightly, trembling just a little. Izuku reflected that he was not the weak, broken death they had crushed. That boy was gone. He looked up with eyes gleaming like twin emerald fires and declared that he was something else now. Oboro teased that it sounded like he was becoming an apex predator. Izuku allowed himself a small smirk and affirmed that he liked the name. When Oboro half-jokingly asked if he was seriously calling himself Apex, Izuku confirmed that he was. He announced that he would go by Apex Shirakumo now. After Izuku and Oboro returned, classes at UA were temporarily suspended. In their place, a full-scale operation began. Pro-heroes across Japan coordinated raids on every known league of villains' safe house and front company. Most locations were empty, a few were strange and unsettling. One site stood out, Jaku General Hospital. The top 10 heroes led the assault there. All Might and Endeavor broke through the front line and confronted 3 nearly complete high-end Nomu. All Might moved with overwhelming force, driving one of the near high-end Nomu back, and the creature attempted to mimic his signature impact and struck back with a mirrored surge of power that pushed All Might backward. Endeavor unleashed a concentrated, flame-powered attack that tore the high-end Nomu apart and rendered it incapacitated. The remaining 2 lunged but were quickly overwhelmed by Hawks, Mirko, and Best Jeanist. The professionals cleared rooms systematically, securing labs and examining evidence. What they uncovered chilled them. Detailed records of Nomu creation with classifications for volunteers and forcibly transformed subjects. In one room, Endeavor discovered a handwritten file with the line, "The fire burns my skin, but I can't stop. It's all I have." The memory of his son Toya flashed uncomfortably in his mind. Endeavor checked the attached ID and, while it was not Toya, the burn in his chest remained. After a week, nearly all of the League's assets had been seized or destroyed. Mountains of data were recovered, some of it deemed far too dangerous to remain. Nizu personally ordered the destruction of specific files, especially those detailing quirk duplication, though a single encrypted copy was preserved under strict lock and key, just in case. UA finally reopened. The students of Class 1A and 1B gathered in a spacious, newly furnished lecture room built to seat 42. Whispers spread as they noticed the extra chairs. When the doors opened, Vlad King entered with his arm in a cast and was accompanied by Midnight. Vlad assured the students that he could still teach despite the cast and mentioned that Recovery Girl had scheduled further treatment later. He announced that from that day forward, Classes 1A and 1B would merge into Class 1 Alpha. Murmurs rippled through the room. Midnight explained that the extra seats were intentional and that the merged class would have 42 students. Tenya Ida asked about Bakugo, Midoriya, and Kendo. Midnight replied that Bakugo and Midoriya had been informed and that Kendo was on campus in the medical wing helping one of the new classmates. The original members of Class 1B exchanged knowing looks. Kendo volunteering to help was not surprising. Momo Yaoyorozu asked whether class representatives should be involved. Midnight said it was not about leadership but something personal. The new student had been believed dead by Kendo. He was alive but carried deep mental and emotional scars from something beyond horrifying. Unease crept through the room as students leaned forward. Jiroda Shishida asked what had happened to him. Vlad explained that the boy had been turned into a Nomu. The room reacted with stunned silence followed by gasps and exclamations. Vlad and Midnight asked the students to let them explain. Vlad displayed an image of a smiling green-haired boy and identified him as Izuku Midoriya, twin brother to Izumi Midoriya, who had once been quirkless. At age 12 his body had been found in an alley and his death had been presumed suicide, but in truth he had been taken. The screen changed to show the hulking, monstrous figure from the USJ attack. Vlad informed them that this was what Izuku had become, the Nomu codenamed Omega. The students absorbed the revelation in stunned silence. Vlad explained that villains had turned him into a living weapon but, unlike other Nomu, he had retained his mind. They had broken him and controlled him with memory suppression and mind control quirks, forcing him to fight against his will. Midnight stepped forward with a steady yet heavy voice and told the class that the control had been broken and that he was free. He said that the boy was now at UA recovering and would be joining their class as a student. Midnight added that the boy did not go by Izuku Midoriya anymore. While he could still be called Izuku if he was comfortable, his chosen name was Apex Shirakumo. Midnight also announced that Apex was now his adopted son. Before questions could be asked, Midnight invited Oboro to enter. A bright flash of blue mist opened at the back of the room in unmistakable warp gate. Students tensed at the familiar phenomenon, but instead of the smoky, disembodied villain they remembered, a man stepped through. He was tall, calm, and unmistakably human, with hair that swirled faintly like mist and gentle golden eyes. Despite the echoes of the villain who had once threatened them, he appeared calm and very much himself. Setsuna Tokage's eyes widened and her lips trembled as she stepped forward in disbelief. Then her expression crumbled into raw emotion as she asked if he was her uncle. Everyone in the room turned to her in stunned confusion. Oboro Shirakumo smiled softly and called her his little raptor, then admitted he could no longer call her that because she had grown. With a strangled sob, Setsuna ran to him and threw herself into his arms, tears streaming as she buried her face against his chest. Eijiro Kirishima and Tetsu exchanged dazed whispers, both wondering aloud what was happening. Midnight rubbed the back of her head sheepishly and explained that Oboro was her husband, that he had been declared dead after a villain attack years ago, and that the League had turned him into a Nomu. The room reacted with shocked gasps. Oboro, still holding Setsuna, looked up and confessed that he had been Kurogyri, but that he had not been able to control himself or the actions he had been forced to take. He apologized for what had happened at USJ. The room fell into a heavy, contemplative silence as his words settled over everyone. Oboro straightened and spoke with resolve about being free now, about returning as a teacher and a support gate, and about reclaiming the name they had forced on him. He made it clear that he would not let anyone control him again. Fu Azui blinked, tilted her head, and asked whether Apex Shirakumo was now his adopted son. Oboro answered in the affirmative. Still clinging to him, Setsuna asked if that meant she had a cousin now, and Midnight chuckled and confirmed that she did. Vlad King cleared his throat and shifted the conversation to a more difficult topic. He explained that after rescuing Apex Shirakumo, the staff had investigated his life before the transformation and found it horrifying. He described that Apex had been relentlessly bullied, both physically and emotionally, often returning to school showing signs of rough treatment. The two main perpetrators identified were Izumi Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo. The announcement produced a chorus of shocked responses. Mina Ishido reacted with disbelief. Vlad confirmed that the school had obtained full academic and behavior records from the students' previous schools, which documented a long history of bullying, particularly targeting students with weak or no quirks. Ijiro, horrified, struggled to reconcile the revelation with what he knew. Ibara Shiozaki clutched her hands and called the behavior unforgivable. Vlad went on to say that the only people who had treated Apex with compassion had been Kendo, her family, and his birth mother, Inko Midoriya, formerly Inko Shimura, and that they had been his only light in a very dark time. A deep, pained silence fell over the room. Vlad explained that the faculty had discussed punishment at length and concluded that immediate expulsion could push the students toward villainy or make them vulnerable to recruitment by the League. Instead, both Bakugo and Izumi would undergo intensive psychological therapy monitored by professionals. Midnight added that this would be their last chance and that if they failed to change, the school would have to remove them to a secure location where they could not harm others. Shoji asked quietly whether Apex had still agreed to join the school after learning all this. Midnight confirmed that he had. She described Apex as stronger than most, not driven by revenge but determined to heal and to show that severe pain did not have to define a person forever. A purple-haired boy entered the room looking exhausted. He introduced himself as Hitoshi Shinso and initially said he would keep the details of his quirk private. Midnight reassured him that these people were not like his old classmates, and after a brief pause he revealed that his quirk was called brainwashing but refused to say more. Denki Kaminari tried to interrupt, but Kyoka Jiro tapped him with her earphone jacks to quiet him. Kendo entered the room next, holding hands with a young man who resembled a male version of Izumi but with a distinct wolf-like mutation. The girls in the room exchanged quick, shy glances at his appearance, and Kendo noticed the reaction yet said nothing. Apex Shirakumo shifted nervously and introduced himself, acknowledging that they had gotten off on the wrong foot and apologizing for his past. He explained that he was not the same person he had been before becoming Omega and that he was trying to rebuild himself. He asked for the chance to get along with everyone. About 2 weeks passed since the arrivals of Apex Shirakumo and Hitoshi Shinso and the announcement that Classes 1A and 1B were merging into Class 1 Alpha. The shocking revelations about Izumi and Bakugo still lingered, leaving friends unsure how to feel, but the newly merged class had been getting along better than expected. Apex spent most of his time with Kendo, though he had begun opening up to other classmates, and most agreed he was kind if a little shy. In the boys' locker room, the class prepared for the UA Sports Festival. Apex fidgeted with his gym shirt, anxious and wondering why he was already expected to compete. Tenya Ida adjusted his glasses and encouraged him, saying that if the teachers believed he was ready, then the class should believe in him too. Hitoshi, half-changed, discovered a capture scarf in his locker with a note stating that Nizu had approved its use for the sports festival and wishing luck to Mini Aizawa. Apex groaned and covered his face at the surprise. Cozy-eyed Tsuburaba crossed his arms and complained about apparent favoritism, while Ijiro Kirishima shrugged and joked that no one knew what would happen. Tenya interrupted and announced that Bakugo and Midoriya would not be participating in the festival for now. He explained that he had spoken with the teachers. Midoriya was making progress and might return before or after midterms, while Bakugo's status remained uncertain. No one looked surprised. Apex Izuku exhaled, ears twitching, thinking he was not shocked and noting that Bakugo was taking so long. As they left the locker room, the girls were just stepping out of theirs. Itsuka Kendo spotted Apex Izuku and walked over with a warm smile, reaching out to gently take his hand and ask if he was ready to show the world who he was. Apex Izuku took a deep breath to steady himself. His ears and tail flicked with nervous energy, but his emerald eyes soon lit up with determination as he looked at his classmates from Class 1 Alpha. Izuku shouted that they should go beyond, and the class raised their voices together, answering with their rallying cry, Plus Ultra. The merged Class 1 Alpha stepped onto the massive field and were met by the thunderous roar of the stadium crowd. Present Mike announced to the arena that the UA Sports Festival was underway, and Apex Izuku flinched slightly at the sound. Apex Izuku thought there were far more people here than he had expected. Rikido Sato chuckled and noted that after the recent villain attack, people wanted to see what the students were made of. Izuku's ears drooped at the reminder, and Rikido immediately winced and apologized. Izuku shook his head and forced a small smile, telling himself he had to move on eventually. Attention shifted as Midnight strode onto the stage alongside someone unexpected. Oboro Shirakumo, in his civilian form, waved energetically and greeted the crowd. Apex Izuku's jaw dropped as he recognized them and realized who was standing on the stage. Masahiro Ojiro blinked and wondered aloud, worried that Shirakumo-sensei appearing in public might draw attention from the league. Apex Izuku replied with dry reasoning that the league would not risk attacking UA while Nizu was on high alert, that it would be suicide even all for one would hesitate when Nizu was provoked. The mental image sent a cold shiver through the class. Midnight stepped forward confidently and signaled that the show was about to begin. Oboro grinned and called to the classes, and with a flourish of his quirk a warp gate opened beside him. A giant spinning wheel floated out as Oboro invited everyone to see what the first event would be. Midnight gave the wheel a dramatic spin, and when it stopped she announced that the first event would be an obstacle race. Apex Izuku raised an eyebrow at the choice, thinking it might be a way to thin the field early. Midnight then gave the signal to begin, and the students moved into position at the starting line. Apex Izuku turned to Itsuka with his tail swishing and asked if she wanted to run together or go solo. Itsuka teased that she wanted to show off a little, and Apex Izuku laughed and leaned in, offering a brief, friendly gesture before heading to the line. In a flash of green light, Apex Izuku's body shifted. Muscles expanded and fur spread across his form as he transformed into a towering emerald-furred wolf. Gasps echoed from the stands and among the other classes at the sight. He wagged his tail, crouched low, and dug his claws into the ground in anticipation. Present Mike counted down and gave the go-ahead, and Apex Izuku blurred from the line in a streak of green before anyone else had moved. He sidestepped the massive ice wall Shoto Todoroki launched to block the others without slowing down. Tenya Ida thought that Apex Izuku was faster than his brother as Apex Izuku tapped into overclock, speed booster, and kinetic hyperdrive and wove through the track like a living missile. A massive robot fist crashed down in front of him, and his mind processed the threat instantly. Remembering the entrance exam bots, he opened his mouth and unleashed a powerful, echoing blast combining his howl shock and radio wave quirks, scrambling the robot sensors and clearing a path forward. Then he saw the zero-pointer bots. Apex Izuku's ears flattened as alarm flooded his mind. He realized the danger and braced himself. Without hesitation he dropped further into his werewolf form, muscles bulging as he tapped multiple strength-enhancing quirks at once: muscle augmentation, spring-like limbs, hypertrophy, an intensified kinetic hyperdrive, titanic surge, stone shift, and iron bloom. He launched himself at the massive robot like a missile and struck with devastating force. The impact sent a shockwave of dust and scattered parts into the air, small support bots tumbling. His blow tore the robot's head unit free and sent the giant body crashing backward amid a cloud of debris. Present Mike yelled in disbelief over the loudspeaker, and Aizawa deadpanned that their nephew was proving to be overwhelmingly powerful. The stadium erupted in astonishment. Apex Izuku stood in the middle of the chaos, dust swirling around him, tail raised and eyes bright with focus. He shifted back toward his wolf form and dashed toward the next obstacle. Present Mike announced that the next challenge was the fall. Apex Izuku skidded to a stop at the edge of a deep pit where stone pillars jutted upward, linked by shaky tightropes. He planned to skip the tightropes and leap pillar to pillar. Shifting back into human form, his ears twitched and his tail swished as he calculated the best path. Before he could leap, Shoto sprinted past and, without a word, created a bridge of ice straight across the gap. Apex Izuku blinked in surprise at the unexpected help. With spring-like limbs powering his legs, Apex Izuku launched himself from one pillar to the next, each landing kicking up small clouds of dust before he sprang off again and occasionally using wall crawler to cling to the sides for better angles. Mid-run he noticed Tsuyu slowly making her way across the ropes and asked what she was doing. Tsuyu tilted her head and cheerfully ribbited that she was climbing the tightropes. Apex Izuku pointed out that her frog-like quirk would let her jump between pillars, and Tsuyu admitted she had never thought of that. Apex Izuku encouraged her to try, and she started moving more decisively. Apex Izuku caught sight of Hitoshi swinging overhead with his capture scarf, supplemented by extra bandages as improvised tools, and thought that was a clever adaptation. A few bounds later, he reached the far side just behind the fastest competitors and entered the minefield. Shifting back into wolf form, he sniffed the air and pricked his ears, easily pinpointing every mine. He started to plan his path when something light landed on his back. Glancing over his shoulder, he found Itsuka grinning at him. Itsuka pointed out that he could detect the mines and be fluffy at the same time, a useful combination. Apex Izuku huffed softly but couldn't help a small amused look. Together they navigated the field at a steady pace. Itsuka suggested that he could take first because he was much faster, but Apex Izuku declined, explaining that he didn't want first place. Every year the leader became the main target in the next round. Apex Izuku opted for second, intending to let Todoroki handle the heat. Itsuka tilted her head and asked why Todoroki. Apex Izuku explained that Todoroki was obviously taking first. Moments later, Todoroki crossed the finish. Apex Izuku secured second, with Itsuka in third. Returning to human form, Izuku dusted himself off and noted that now they had to wait. Itsuka, still riding on his back, agreed. When Izuku wondered why she was still there, Itsuka gave a quick, affectionate touch to his cheek and said she stayed because he was ridiculously comfortable and his fur felt softer than her bed. Everyone finally crossed the finish line. Midnight moved forward to announce the next stage and revealed the giant wheel's result, a cavalry battle. Apex Izuku reacted with a flat acknowledgement when Itsuka suggested they team up, and they agreed. Students immediately began grouping, calculating points, and eyeing Apex Izuku for the versatility of his quirks. Midnight called for attention and explained the scoring. Placements earned points in increments of 5, and first place would receive 10 million points. The crowd gasped and turned to look at Todoroki as if he were prey. He remained outwardly unfazed. Apex Izuku and Itsuka exchanged a look and confirmed a plan. Apex Izuku estimated they would have about 405 points between them. Itsuka suggested recruiting Shiozaki and Shinso. Apex Izuku agreed, noting that Shiozaki's vines could restrain attackers and Shinso's quirk was unpredictable, especially since no one knew what would trigger it. Itsuka warned about Monoma possibly copying Shinso's quirk. Apex Izuku said that if Monoma did, he could erase it, mentioning, when Itsuka blinked in surprise, that Aizawa was his uncle and that both Aizawa and Mike had told him to copy their quirks. Itsuka trailed off, having answered her own question. Elsewhere, Izumi Midoriya sat alone in a stark white room. Her right hand was missing as a result of the earlier confrontation with Omega and Izuku. Staring at the stump, she remembered the doctor's assessment. Her quirk had been weakened. She had relied on her dominant hand to channel it, and without it her control was broken. She would need to retrain from scratch with her left hand. The room felt like a clinical ward, comfortable enough on the surface, but full of quirk-suppressing technology that could shut her down if necessary. The same precautions applied to Katsuki, and thinking of him made her scowl. He had pulled her into bullying Izuku, and her father had never treated Izuku well either. At least her father was now incarcerated. Izumi told herself that she should be in jail for what she had done and that she had hurt Izuku. She believed the boy she had called brother was gone and hoped Katsuki would remain confined. A knock preceded the nurse's entrance. The nurse greeted Izumi and asked how she was doing. Izumi repeated that she felt she belonged behind bars. The nurse gently insisted that Izumi had been manipulated into her actions and had shown sincere effort to change, which was why she was in treatment rather than a cell. Then the nurse offered surprising news. Izumi had been allowed to watch the UA Sports Festival. Izumi was shocked and asked why, noting she had thought UA-related contact was restricted until shortly before release. The nurse explained that seeing her brother's progress might help with her regret and provide closure if she intended to rejoin the hero course. Izumi asked whether Katsuki would be present. The nurse said no, that Bakugo would remain in his room for obvious reasons. Izumi agreed, muttering that the place felt more like a prison for him than anyone else. The nurse also mentioned a prepared prosthetic hand that would look and feel natural but would not allow her to channel her quirk yet. Izumi accepted that. Later, Izumi sat beside Rei Todoroki, a woman with white hair and gentle gray eyes. Rei had been watching the sports festival already, and now she and Izumi watched together. Rei glanced at Izumi and recognized the visible scars of self-hatred and guilt, but also noticed flickers of hope beneath the darkness. Gradually, the pain in Izumi's eyes seemed to be easing, though the wounds remained raw. When the second event began, Izumi saw her brother for the first time since the incident. He looked familiar but different. Shorter hair, wolf ears, a tail, fur, and claws. Rei quietly pointed out her own son, Shoto Todoroki, reminding Izumi that she had met him before and that he had been distant then. Izumi's attention returned to her brother. He was smiling a genuine smile she had not seen since before they were told he was quirkless. He stood with three others, a boy with messy purple hair who wore a capture scarf like Aizawa, a girl whose hair behaved like living vines, and Itsuka Kendo standing close to him. Izuku transformed into a massive green wolf as his teammates handed their points to Itsuka, who climbed onto his back. The cavalry battle erupted. Most teams charged straight for Todoroki's group, desperate for the 10 million points, but Izuku's team kept moving. Izuku sprinted across the arena with Itsuka riding, while the vine-haired teammate used her quirk to snatch headbands and block anyone who closed in. The purple-haired boy moved minimally, tapping his foot now and then. Each time he acted, Izuku responded with perfectly timed dodges and leaps to avoid attacks. Izumi whispered that he had built a strategy around all their quirks and their limitations, and that he had not changed. The event concluded with the standings announced. Team 1 consisted of Shoto Todoroki, Momo Yaoyorozu, Tenya Ida, and Denki Kaminari. Team 2 was Apex Shirakumo, Itsuka Kendo, Hitoshi Shinso, and Ibara Shizuki. Team 3 included Tetsutetsu, Eijiro Kirishima, Hantashiro, and Mina Ishido. Team 4 featured Mei Hatsum, Fumikage Tokoyami, Achiko Uraraka, and Yuga Oyama. Izumi's eyes lingered on her brother's new name. She admitted aloud that she had not known what name he was using now and felt she did not deserve to. She reminded herself of how she had made his life difficult and reflected that if she had simply been his sister, perhaps he would not have suffered in the way he had. Rei placed a gentle hand on Izumi's shoulder and told her she had to stop blaming herself. Rei then hesitated before adding that she had overheard the doctors. People said Izumi's brother might be allowed to come someday. They thought it could help her. Izumi's head dropped. She asked why he would come and insisted she was the reason he would not. Rei wrapped her in a firm hug and interrupted, explaining that she had overheard the staff and that Izumi's brother wanted to see her and talk to her. Rei pulled back just enough to meet Izumi's eyes and told her again that her brothers still wanted to see her. Tears welled up and spilled over as Izumi buried her face in Rei's shoulder, shaking. Rei held her close and offered gentle words of comfort. Back at UA, it was time for one-on-one battles. The bracket paired students across 8 matches. Fumikage Tokoyami against Achiko Uraraka, Tetsutetsu against Eijiro Kirishima, Hantashiro against Denki Kaminari, Mei Hatsum against Hitoshi Shinso, Mina Ishido against Ibara Shiozaki, Momo Yaoyorozu against Yuga Aoyama, Apex Shirakumo against Shoto Todoroki, and Tenya Ida against Itsuka Kendo. Before the first round, Todoroki spoke with Apex, sharing something of his past. Round 1 opened with Fumikage Tokoyami steadying himself, aware that Ichigo Uraraka could make things difficult, but knowing his quirk, Dark Shadow, could overwhelm her. Ichigo moved with a plan of her own, intending to turn Dark Shadow's strength against him by exploiting its weakness in light. Announcers and staff took their places. Present Mike energized the crowd as the match began, Oboro reminded everyone of the victory conditions, and midnight counted down to the start. Dark Shadow burst outward, claws slamming into the arena floor and sending rubble into the air. Dust filled the arena as Ichigo darted between the strikes, using her quirk to lift pieces of debris and send them above the stage. Her breathing quickened as her power pushed her limits. A strike from Dark Shadow clipped her side and sent her sprawling near the edge. Fumikage moved in, intent on ending the match. Despite the hit, Ichigo smiled through the pain and pushed her fingertips together to release a rain of rubble that cascaded from above. The attack rained down across the arena, but Fumikage covered himself as Dark Shadow formed a protective cocoon. When the dust settled, he stood unharmed and praised the attack as brilliant but ultimately ineffective against his power. Ichigo pushed forward, but Dark Shadow intercepted and tossed her out of bounds. Fumikage offered a hand as a gesture of respect. Fumikage Tokoyami emerged victorious. Round 2 between Tetsu and Eijiro Kirishima played out much like expected, both refusing to back down and ending in a draw. Round 3 saw Denki Kaminari unleash a surge of electricity that struck Hantashiro before he could react, leaving him out of the match. Denki Kaminari was declared the winner. Round 4 between Mei Hatsum and Hitoshi Shinso unfolded with Mei turning the bout into a showcase for her gadgets, leaving Shinso to claim the win. Round 5 was a short exchange in which Mina Ashido charged forward but was ensnared by Ibara Shiozaki's vines and gently carried out of bounds, giving Ibara the victory. Round 6 had Yuga Aoyama fire his naval laser first, but Momo Yaoyorozu produced a mirror that reflected the beam and sent it back, propelling Yuga out into the stands. Momo was declared the winner. In his room before round 7, Apex paced restlessly, tail flicking and ears twitching as he prepared. He resolved that he had to force Todoroki to use his fire. He would not let Todoroki limit himself. Apex thought of how no one had helped him when he needed it, and he decided he would help Todoroki. The arena erupted as Todoroki and Apex stepped onto the stage. Todoroki moved forward with a calm, unreadable expression, cold mist rolling off his right side. Apex stood opposite him, green fur stirring and gaze locked on Todoroki. Present Mike hyped the matchup, calling it a clash between the Wolf and the Ice Prince. Midnight gave the signal to begin. Todoroki opened with a massive wave of ice that roared across the stage. Apex answered by unleashing black lightning amplified by Impactor. The current tore through the glacier, melting and shattering it. He formed a dark ball, charged it with black lightning and Impactor, and hurled it, the sphere splitting into several orbs that detonated in crackling bursts. Todoroki countered with another wall of ice, but it shattered against the explosive orbs. Apex blurred forward with spring-like speed, his limbs propelling him. Pump Up amplified his strength, and his strike hammered into Todoroki, driving him through several detonations and sending him slamming into the ground. Apex urged Todoroki to get up and to stop relying only on ice, calling for him to use his fire. Todoroki staggered to his feet, showing a split lip from the confrontation, and firmly refused to use his fire, insisting that he never would. Apex moved again in an instant, his fist landing with reinforced power from muscle augmentation. He shouted that Todoroki did not understand. Apex had not been born privileged with a quirk, he had been told he was quirkless and worthless, and he had fought to claw his way forward. Now confronted with Todoroki's refusal to use part of his power, Apex demanded that Todoroki stop letting his father control him and use the abilities that were his own. Apex then unleashed a massive, thunderous explosion that engulfed the arena. The blast melted and dispersed the ice that Todoroki had created. Todoroki barely dodged, and his right arm showed signs of the blast's heat. As the smoke cleared, Apex stepped forward with his eyes glowing and declared that the power he now used was not the bully's to control anymore but his to wield for protection and good. He argued that if he could transform the influence of his tormentor into something positive, then Todoroki could stop living in his father's shadow and claim his own strength. Todoroki's eyes widened at the intensity of Apex's conviction. Steam rose from Shoto's left side. Heat bled into the air. For the first time in years, fire flickered across his hand. His mind flashed to his mother's words. Flames burst alive from his left half, fire raging as ice and heat poured out together. Shoto smiled, genuine and free. Shoto thought quietly that it had been so long since he had felt that warmth. He looked at Apex Izuku and shook his head with a small laugh, calling Apex insane for helping an enemy. Apex Izuku smirked and said that he was helping his classmate. Apex grinned and muttered as he listed his arsenal: spring-like limbs, hypertrophy, rivet, radio waves, dark ball, air cannon, impactor, kinetic hyperdrive, repulsion, black lightning, explosion. His right arm swelled unnaturally under hypertrophy, multiple quirks merging into a bright, intense glow. Apex shouted the name of his technique: Nuclear Strike. Midnight called for Cementos, and Cementos confirmed that he was already on it. 5 massive walls rose between them. Both boys fired at once. Shoto unleashed fire and ice in a devastating wave. Apex hurled his supercharged strike. The attacks tore through every wall and collided in the center. A shockwave tore through the arena, dust and flames billowing and swallowing everything. When the dust settled, Apex was partly buried in debris, pulling himself free with ragged breaths. Across from him, Shoto lay unconscious, pinned beneath broken stone. Midnight announced that the winner was Apex Shirakumo. The stadium erupted in cheers. Apex stood shakily as his injuries visibly healed. He let out a hoarse sound of pain just as his legs gave out. Oboro appeared in time to catch him before he hit the ground and muttered that the kid had gone way overboard. Oboro opened a warp gate and transported them both to Recovery Girl's office. The winner remained Apex Shirakumo. Round 8 was Tenya Ida versus Itsuka Kendo. Ida tried to take Itsuka out with a single strike, but she was ready. After weeks of training with Apex Izuku, she had grown accustomed to facing incredible speed. With a precise counter, she sent Ida flying out of the arena. In the tiebreaker, the match was decided by an arm wrestle, and Eijiro Kirishima won by going all out. The quarterfinal rounds were set: Fumikage Tokoyami versus Eijiro Kirishima, Denki Kaminari versus Hitoshi Shinso, Ibara Shiozaki versus Momo Yaoyorozu, and Apex Shirakumo versus Itsuka Kendo. Fumikage stepped onto the stage with dark shadow coiling and ready. Eijiro entered determined to win, though unsure how to overcome a long-range opponent. Midnight called for the match to begin. Fumikage commanded Dark Shadow to strike. Dark Shadow lunged at Eijiro, aiming for his gut, but Eijiro's hardened abdomen absorbed the blow. Swinging his hardened arms, he struck Dark Shadow's head, forcing the living shadow to recoil toward Fumikage. Fumikage adapted his strategy. He commanded Dark Shadow to envelop his upper body like armor, expanding clawed hands that could strike, defend, and propel him at speed. Eijiro muttered that he was in trouble. Fumikage replied that he was. Dark Shadow's claws launched at Eijiro. He crossed his hardened arms to take the hit, then charged forward, swinging, but Dark Shadow's armor absorbed everything. Fumikage countered and punched Eijiro out of the arena. Midnight declared Fumikage Tokoyami the winner. Fumikage nodded respectfully to Eijiro for his effort. In the next quarterfinal, Hitoshi Shinso engaged Denki Kaminari in conversation and managed to distract him until Denki walked out of the arena. Hitoshi Shinso was declared the winner. Momo Yaoyorozu entered the arena having crafted a sword to slice through Ibara's anticipated vines. Ibara silently prayed for a fair match. Midnight called for the bout to begin. Momo charged, and Ibara sent vines from the ground to grab her sword arm. Momo quickly produced a pair of glasses that created a blinding flash, and in the confusion she conjured a smaller sword, cut through the vines, and used the opening to push Ibara out. Midnight announced Momo Yaoyorozu as the winner. Round 4 of the quarterfinals was Apex Shirakumo versus Itsuka Kendo. Apex Izuku stepped onto the field, ready to face Itsuka. Itsuka readied herself, still amazed that the boy she had thought lost was alive and now back with them. Itsuka smiled and greeted him warmly. Apex returned the smile. Itsuka proposed they fight without quirks, a normal, skill-based fight. Apex agreed, noting that he could not deactivate his steel bone and wolf quirks, so those would remain active. Itsuka accepted and said they would rely on skill. Midnight acknowledged the rules, explaining that the fight would proceed without quirks except for the ones Apex could not turn off. Some spectators were confused, but most ignored it, captivated by the contest about to unfold. Apex and Itsuka faced each other in the center of the arena. The air was thick with anticipation. No quirks, no shortcuts, only skill, reflexes, and raw determination. Midnight shouted for the match to begin. Apex lunged first with claws extended. Itsuka anticipated the strike and sidestepped, pivoting to counter with a quick palm strike. Apex blocked instinctively, the sound of impact echoing through the arena. Circled and tested each other, each movement calculated. Apex feinted a high strike, then dove low for a leg sweep. Itsuka leapt, twisting in midair, and landed behind him to aim a backhand. Apex rolled with the blow and sprang forward to grab her wrist. Itsuka twisted free and elbowed him sharply in the ribs. Apex staggered but recovered instantly, his wolf instincts sharpening his reflexes. He spun low, connecting with Itsuka's ankle and causing her to stumble, but she regained balance and delivered a fierce knee strike. Both fighters were visibly fatigued but unyielding. They paused, breathing heavily, eyes locked, two warriors pushing their limits. Apex charged, faster now, a flurry of strikes meant to overwhelm. Itsuka parried expertly, but Apex adjusted mid-motion, using her defense against her. A quick push to the side, a feint, and he swept her off balance. Itsuka recovered, but Apex did not relent. He grabbed her arm during her counterstrike, twisted, and launched her into the air with a practiced throw. She hit the ground hard, rolled, and sprang up. Apex anticipated the motion and, with a final, perfectly timed sweep and a swift push, sent Itsuka sliding out of the arena. Midnight announced Apex Shirakumo as the winner. Apex extended a hand to help Itsuka up. Both were panting and bruised, but smiling, two competitors who had proved their skill. Itsuka offered a brief, grateful embrace in celebration of the match. The winners advanced to the semifinals, Fumikage Tokoyami vs Hitoshi Shinso, and Momo Yaoyorozu vs Apex Shirakumo. Fumikage and Hitoshi stepped into the arena amid hushed anticipation. Black feathers drifted around Fumikage as dark shadow loomed, while Hitoshi stood calm, his purple hair shifting in the breeze. Midnight called for the match to begin. Dark shadow lashed out instantly, its clawed hand cutting through the air. Hitoshi twisted aside, narrowly avoiding the strike, and snapped his capture scarf around Dark Shadow's head in an attempt to restrain it. For a moment the shadow struggled, muffled by the binding. Shinso surged forward to close the gap, but Fumikage countered, his fist slamming into Hitoshi's chest and forcing him back. Hitoshi tried again and again to bait Fumikage into speaking, straining to activate his quirk, but Fumikage remained resolutely silent. With a roar, Dark Shadow broke free of the bindings and swept Hitoshi off his feet, sending him toward the arena's edge. Hitoshi scrambled to recover but could not stop his momentum and tumbled out of bounds. The announcer Midnight declared Fumikage Tokoyami the winner. Semifinal round 2 began with Apex Shirakumo stepping into the arena, his green fur bristling as the wind swept across the stadium. Across from him, Momo Yaoyorozu moved with calm focus, her ponytail flowing as she prepared. The match began. Momo created a pair of flashbangs and hurled them to blind her opponent. The bursts flared, but Apex's wolf-like eyes, adapted to sudden light, did not falter. He slammed a clawed hand forward and released a compressed air blast that tore across the arena like a shockwave. Momo formed a large shield and dug her heels in, but the force shattered her defense and launched her backward. The crowd gasped as she skidded across the stage and was blown out of bounds. Midnight announced Apex Shirakumo as the winner. Final round, Apex Shirakumo vs Fumikage Tokoyami. High above, All Might in his true form watched the field with a quiet smile, thinking of Nana and feeling proud of the grandson of his late master. He watched Apex move with unshakable determination and felt certain the young man would accept his offer. Class 1 Alpha erupted in the stands, cheering for their representatives. Voices debated whether Apex's overwhelming strength or Tokoyami's tactical mastery and Dark Shadow's relentlessness would decide the match. Itsuka clenched her fists with quiet certainty, believing Apex had the edge. Far away, in shadow, All for One scowled as the broadcast revealed two familiar Nomu and remembered their betrayal. His fist tightened, fury shifting into a cruel grin as he vowed to strip away quirks, crush his enemies, and destroy what they loved. A dark pressure rippled outward, as if Apex himself had sensed the threat. Nizu, calm and composed with a cup of tea, fixed his sharp gaze on Apex and quietly declared that he had found his successor. The declaration sent an uneasy shiver through the stadium. Apex's wolf ears flicked and he froze mid-step, narrowing his eyes as if hearing a whisper meant only for him. Fumikage frowned, unease prickling at him. Both reacted at once to Nizu's name. Apex scratched the back of his head and suggested they begin the fight before things got stranger, glancing toward the referee for the start. Midnight blinked for a moment before resuming her role and signaling the match to begin. Fumikage ordered Dark Shadow to attack. Apex sprang aside with extended limbs, evading the strike. A sphere of light appeared in his palm and he hurled it forward, blasting Dark Shadow backward. Dark Shadow, reeling, expressed surprise at the sudden use of light. Fumikage urged them to press the attack and commanded Dark Shadow to armor up. Dark Shadow coiled around Fumikage, forming a familiar battle armor. Fumikage announced their ultimate move, Black Abyss, and Dark Shadow's massive arms surged forward. Apex braced, combining enhanced springs for power, repulsion for reach, and his explosive trait into one focused strike. The resulting blast ripped across the arena. Fumikage barely dodged, while Dark Shadow recoiled and faltered, weakened by the unexpected radiance. Fumikage called out to his bonded quirk as it struggled under the light. Apex stood resolute and revealed that light was his power, announcing the quirk known as luminescence. A brilliant radiance flowed from Apex, unlike an ordinary glow, and the crowd reacted in stunned silence. Fumikage staggered and struggled to accept what he saw. Light condensed along Apex's arms, merging with his bone blade ability to form radiant weapons. He unleashed those light blades and pressed forward, strikes flashing with speed and precision that forced Fumikage back. With a final motion he retracted the blades and launched an uppercut that sent Fumikage flying out of the ring. Midnight proclaimed Apex Shirakumo the champion. Apex raised his fist in triumph, thinking that he had won and that now he would show everyone what victory meant to him. All Might looked on, his smile widening with pride at what he had witnessed. The UA Sports Festival drew to a close, another chapter ended. Later, Class 1 Alpha gathered in their classroom, waiting for their teachers to arrive. Kyoka Jiro asked what everyone had done after the sports festival and glanced toward Itsuka and Apex, wondering if the two had spent time together. Apex replied that he had mostly stayed home and had tried to visit Izumi, but the doctors had said she needed more time. Apex thought they would let him know when he could see her. Shoto told the class that he had talked with his mother. The classroom quieted as Aizawa and Vlad King entered. Vlad King announced that the students had done great during the sports festival and that the next step was hero internships. He held up a remote and explained that each of them would be assigned to a pro-hero agency for a week to learn from real heroes and see firsthand what it took to run an agency. He pressed the button, and the list of offers appeared on the screen. Apex Shirakumo had 9,954 offers. Shoto Todoroki had 4,123 offers. Tetsu and Ijiro reacted in unison, astonished at how many offers Shirakumo had. Fumikage muttered that he had only 360 offers and accepted that the shadow that followed him affected his popularity. Shoto admitted that the reason he had so many offers was because of his father. Apex sighed and remarked that a lot of those offers were probably people trying to boost their own popularity. The class agreed that was likely. Aizawa used his quirk to quiet the room and reminded them that even if they had not received an offer, they would still do internships with one of UA's partnered professionals. Vlad King nodded and added that they were all heading out into the real world now, not eggs anymore but hatchlings stretching their wings. He began to continue when the door slammed open. Midnight strode in dramatically, shouting about hero names, followed by a chuckling Oboro. Oboro told the students that choosing a hero name was a big deal since it could stick for their entire careers, and he and Midnight would help them pick names. Aizawa, cocooned in his sleeping bag on the floor, muttered that he had not chosen his name and that Hisashi had done it for him. Oboro grinned and explained that that was why Hisashi was not there that day. He invited Vlad and Aizawa to add their input if they wanted. After a few minutes, the students began writing their hero names on whiteboards. Midnight asked who would go first. The class reacted nervously to the prospect of announcing their names. Yuga Aoyama went to the front and, with a flourish, revealed a flamboyant name that read like a whole sentence. The class reacted that it was too long, and Midnight suggested changes. Oboro and Vlad agreed it needed revision. Midnight revised the name into something shorter and suggested Azure Light. Yuga accepted gracefully. Tfu Azui followed, saying she had chosen a name since she was little and revealed Rainy Season Hero, Froppy, punctuating the moment with a cute face. The class found it adorable and Midnight approved. One by one, the students revealed their hero names. Shoto initially used his given name, and when Aizawa asked if he needed more time, Shoto indicated that using his own name was fine. Oboro teased that Shoto did not know what to pick, to which Shoto only nodded. Apex raised his hand and suggested Frostburn for Shoto, saying it fit both sides of his quirk. Shoto nodded and wrote it down. Midnight approved. When it was Apex's turn, he walked up front with his tail swishing and revealed that he had chosen Fenrir as his hero name. Iber questioned whether it was the name of a god and why he would pick it. Apex rubbed the back of his neck and smiled sheepishly, admitting he could not explain why it felt right. Midnight considered it and approved. Time passed, and Apex later entered All Might's office. Apex addressed him respectfully, and All Might explained that there was something important he wanted to discuss, an offer of sorts. Apex sat down, curious. Oboro entered the room soon after, and Apex recognized him and asked why he was there. Oboro said he knew a bit more about what All Might was about to tell him. All Might took a deep breath and handed Apex a photograph. He explained that the woman in the picture was his master, Nana Shimura, who had been killed by followers of All for 1 year before he became a pro-hero. The photograph showed a tall, graceful woman with intelligent eyes and a kind smile. Her presence conveyed both strength and warmth. All Might said that Nana had a family, her husband had been killed by All for One's followers, and her son had been placed in foster care for protection. All Might then revealed that Nana had a daughter who had grown up to be Apex's mother. Apex realized with dawning shock that the woman in the photograph resembled his mother and understood that his mother, Inko Shimura, was Nana Shimura's daughter, making Nana his grandmother. He stared at the photograph, the revelation settling over him. All Might's tone grew solemn as he continued. He explained that they had discovered Apex's uncle had been killed years ago. All for One had used quirks to alter appearances and manipulate people to get close to the family, and he had used other quirks to twist someone's mind and make them abusive toward their own loved ones. Afterward, All for One had taken the youngest child's quirk and replaced it with another quirk that the agency now recognized. Apex asked what quirk had been involved. Oboro answered quietly that it was decay. A haunting memory of a pale-haired figure with red eyes flickered through Apex's mind, bringing a chill. Apex asked whether that meant Tamura Shigaraki was his cousin. All Might confirmed with grave solemnity that, sadly, he was. Apex was stunned and momentarily speechless. All Might then told him there was still more to discuss. He asked Apex if he had ever heard of a quirk called One for All. Apex shook his head, saying he had not. All Might explained the origin of the quirk, its history with All for One, and its long line of successors. He revealed how Nana Shimura had entrusted it to him and how he himself had once been quirkless. As he spoke, his heroic form faded, leaving his thin, scarred true body visible, the proof standing directly before the young wolf. All Might offered One for All to the young Shirakumo. Apex froze and protested, saying he already had more quirks than he could count and that he already possessed All for One. He insisted he could not take one for all because All Might would no longer be able to be a hero if he did. Oboro placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder and addressed him as Izuku. He told Izuku that, though he might not feel worthy, he put others before himself every time and might be the only person able to use this quirk safely. Apex frowned and asked what Oboro meant. Oboro explained that one for all accelerates the aging of its holder and can eventually kill them if kept too long, but that Izuku's body and quirks allowed him to adapt and change himself, meaning he could wield it without suffering that fate. Apex's eyes widened as he asked if that meant All Might would die. Oboro shook his head quickly and explained that the accelerated aging only affected those who already had another quirk, and that All Might had been quirkless, so that would not happen. Apex sighed in relief and agreed to accept the power. He smiled brightly, making All Might think a second son had appeared. All Might regained his heroic form, plucked a hair, and told Apex to take it. Apex responded dryly that he had eaten worse. Later that night, Izuku lay in his bed at the room overflowing with hero merchandise of every kind. A poster of Eraserhead frozen mid-action hung on the door, the capture scarf coiling like a living snake. One artist's quirk had captured scenes with impossible sharpness, and many more images lined the walls. Mirko leaping from a rooftop under moonlight with the caption Luna Fall, Hawks soaring with jet streams trailing his wings, and Ryukyu split between calm human form and towering dragon form. The majority of the room, however, was dominated by All Might memorabilia. Posters lined the walls, shelves held action figures, and number 1 hero collectibles filled nearly every available space. On Izuku's dresser were framed photos of his family. The first showed 4-year-old Izuku and Izumi before their quirk tests, with Hisashi Midoriya, an older Izuku with black hair and a neatly kept beard holding Izumi's hand, and Inko Midoriya, resembling Nana with green hair, smiling warmly as she held Izuku's hand. The second photo showed Inko and 11-year-old Izuku. Inko looked smaller, exhaustion etched beneath her eyes, but her smile overflowed with love. The final picture showed Izuku, Oboro, and Nemuri together, all smiling, Izuku's grin in that photo brighter than any other. There were more pictures scattered around the room of Izuku with Itsuka and the rest of the Kendo family, but for now the focus remained on the green wolf boy himself, restless and tossing as he slept. Inside Izuku's mind, he found himself in a vast, void-like space where countless stars shimmered, each glowing in colors he could barely name. He wondered aloud where he was. A gentle voice identified the place as his vestige realm and called him grandson. When he turned, the woman from the photograph All Might had shown him stood before him. Nana Shimura smiled warmly and told Izuku she had waited a long time to meet him. Izuku ran forward, embraced her, and cried. Nana held him and whispered comforting words, calming him over time. Izuku asked how she was there and what the place was. Nana explained that this was his vestige realm, the place where his quirks resided, and she pointed out the lights overhead, saying each represented one of his quirks. She indicated a large star-like orb of crimson and emerald currents as his birth quirk and directed his attention to another orb unlike the rest, multicolored and constantly shifting. Nana identified the multicolored orb as One for All and told him he would want to see what happened. They watched as the two orbs collided, their lights spiraling and blending until One for All fused with Izuku's birth quirk. Izuku felt a deep change within himself. Moments later, 7 figures began to appear around them. The first was a young man with a frail, malnourished frame and messy white hair, his presence forming from drifting white fire and smoke before solidifying. He introduced himself as Yoichi Shigaraki, the first user and creator of One for All, and then proceeded to tell Izuku the full history of One for All. Yoichi and the others spoke of the origin of One for All, its bond to All for One, and the lives of every past user. One by one, each added their experiences, recounting victories, failures, and the prices they had paid. At last, Yoichi trailed off, leaving his sentence unfinished. That was everything. Izuku exhaled slowly and summarized that, in short, All for One and the Vestiges had been locked in a battle for generations, a struggle that, unlike All Might's, had been completely one-sided. The Vestiges nodded in agreement. Izuku sighed and asked what to do next, wondering aloud whether he should hunt down all for one and kill him. The second and third users opened their mouths to answer, but Nana intervened with a sharp, playful swat to their heads and told him he would not go hunting that monster. Nana stepped closer, placed her hands on his shoulders, met his gaze, and explained that One for All had fully merged with his quirk so completely that it could no longer be passed on. Izuku's eyes widened at the news and he demanded to know how that could be. Nana told him that One for All had always been a strange quirk, and that his own quirk had a tendency to merge others together to make room and adapt. When his quirk encountered One for All, it saw an opportunity to evolve and absorbed it. Yoichi nodded in agreement and added that each of their quirks had blended with the others in this realm in one way or another. He smiled and gently placed a hand on Izuku's head, reminding him that they were there for him. Yoichi urged Izuku not to repeat their mistakes, warning that he would need his friends and loved ones to defeat Yoichi's brother. The world around Izuku began to fade, the stars dimming until only the past users remained. Nana smiled warmly and told him she loved him, asking him to tell Toshi that she was proud of him. Izuku smiled back, tears welling in his eyes, and promised he would. With that, Izuku jolted awake in his room. Small tears slid down his cheeks, but the smile on his face never faded.